Hello and welcome to another lecture on basic macroeconomics. Today it is our eighth lecture on basic macroeconomics, and we are going to study circular flow of income. Now, circular flow of income is studied for different models. We have two sector model, we have three sector model, then we have four sector model. So we are having three models, and we begin obviously by the two sector model because that is the most fundamental and elementary of these models. Therefore we have to we have to study this. Now, one thing before we start with the two sector model that you need to keep in mind is that the circular flow of income concept is very important to begin with, because it is this very concept that makes us realize how different sectors of an economy or how different variables of an economy are related to each other, and that is where we start beginning to understand the functioning of an economy, the dynamics of an economy. Therefore, it is very important from that perspective. One fundamental thing that you need to keep in mind to understand circular flow of income is that every transaction has got two dimensions. A transaction has got two dimensions. One dimension is it involves goods and services, then obviously it involves money, and there is exchange of these two things for each other. So a person who is a consumer, usually like you and me, what we do is that we get goods and services, and these are produced by different producers. So a product flows, or a good and service flows from producer to consumer, okay, and money flows from consumer to producer. So there are two types of flows involved in a transaction. One we call as product flow, or we call it real flow, and another we call as money flow or nominal flow. Okay, nominal flow. So you have involvement of goods and services on the one hand, you have money on the other hand. Therefore they are exchanged for each other, and there are two flows emerge through a transaction, the product flow or the real flow, and then we have second one is money flow or nominal flow. So let's now try to understand what circular flow of income is all about. Now we have to use a two sector model. So we are having a household sector, then we are having a business sector. Now, what is the job of the business sector? It produces goods and services. And what is the job of the household sector? It consumes those goods and services. So let us begin with that very relationship. Now, business sector produces goods and services. So these are goods and services, and these are then utilized by the household sector. So there's a flow of goods and services from business sector, from the productive sector to the consumption sector or the household sector. Now on the other hand, the household sector gets these goods and services when they make payments, when they make expenditure. So there is consumption expenditure on part of the household sector, and through that money flows to the business sector or the productive sector. So these are the two dimensions of the transaction that we have earlier talked about. Now let's look into another type of relationship between household sector and the business sector. Now business sector needs factors of production to produce goods and services, but business sector is not the owner of factors of production. It is the household sector which owns factors of production. So factors of production are with the household sector, so we call them factor sources, and then these are utilized by the business sector. So there is movement of factors of production or factor services from household sector to the business sector. Now obviously household sector will not give factor services without remuneration, so the business sector has to pay remuneration, and it pays remuneration. We call that remuneration as factor payments. We call it factor payments, and that is given to whom? That is given to the household sector. So this is the simple relationship between two sectors, household sector and the business sector, and it has got two dimensions. One is that goods and services flow from the business sector to the household sector, and for that the business sector receives consumption expenditure on part of the household sector. And the other dimension, other relationship is that household sector gives factor services to the business sector, and business sector makes payment. For that we call as factor payment. Now what is circular flow of income? Now if you look to the at the inner loop, goods and services move from the business sector, okay, through, oh sorry, one thing we need to keep in mind here is that this is where these transactions take place. We call it product market, okay. So where final goods and services are bought and sold, this is what we call as product market. And on the other hand, where we are selling and buying the factor services, where we are selling and buying the factor services, we call it the factor market. So you need to keep this thing in mind. Now business sector produces goods and services. These flow through the product market to what? To the household sector, and from the household sector, factor services or factors of production move to the business sector, and this is what we called earlier as a real flow. So this is real flow, or this is product flow, okay. So this is a complete flow. Things begin with the business sector, and then they move back to the business sector in the form of factors of production. Therefore this is called as circular flow, and in this flow what is involved is goods and services or and factors of production. So therefore it is called as circular flow, or and it is real flow, or we call it product flow. Now take the look at the outer loop. Now begin with the household sector. Now this household sector makes consumption expenditure, so money flows in the form of consumption expenditure to what? To the business sector, and from business sector money flows in the form of what? In the form of factor payments to the household sector. So money started, for example, flowing. If we take the initial point as the household sector, it came back to this very initial point, that is the household sector, and the process will continue like this. Therefore again a circular flow we are noticing, and this circular flow we call as nominal flow, or we call it money flow. Okay, so we are having here circular flow of income concept, we are having two flows taking place simultaneously. The one is the real flow, and another is the nominal flow. Now as yet we haven't talked about why should it be called as circular flow of income. Basically let us focus on this very loop over here. Now what is this? It is factor payment, that is factors of production receive their remuneration, and this actually becomes income for the household sector, and this is the total income in the economy. So this very income obviously moves into the household sector. From household sector this income moves through this loop, that is consumption expenditure, and goes back to the business sector. So the point here is it is actually this very income which we talked about, which is flowing from household sector to the business sector and back to the household sector. Therefore, it is called as circular flow of income. So I hope that now we understand some fundamental things about business sector, product market, factor market, and household sector, and why this is called as circular flow and why it should be called as circular flow of income. Now, a final point over here is that let's focus on the functions of the business sector. So business sector produces goods and services. Okay, it then receives consumption expenditure, then it utilizes factor services, and finally it makes factor payments. Now, what is the role of the household sector? Household sector consumes the goods and services, it makes consumption expenditure, it gives factor services to the business sector, and then it receives factor payments. So this is something that's very important that we need to keep in mind with regard to the circular flow of income. Since we have already talked about why it should be called as circular flow of income, let's for time being focus on how national income or national output is measured with the help of circular flow of income. Now let us focus on the again circular flow of income. Now this is our business sector, this is our household sector. Now look at this, this is the flow of goods and services to the household sector, and this is the flow of the factor services to the business sector. On the contrary, this is the flow of money in the form of consumption expenditure to the business sector from household sector, and then from here in the form of factor payments back to the household sector. So we are completing these two flows. Now one thing we need to keep in mind here is that these two flows move in opposite directions. So we have flow of goods and services from business sector to the household sector, and we have flow of money, that is consumption expenditure, from the household sector to the business sector. So we have flow of factor services from household sector to the business sector, but flow of factor payments is opposite from business sector to the household sector. Now let's focus on income. This is factor payment, and let's focus over here. Now factor payment is the total factor payment received by the household sector, which also becomes their income. It becomes the income of an economy. So if we measure all the factor payments, then that is actually the total income received in an economy by the people. Okay, so if we measure therefore this very factor payment, we are measuring actually national income, or can also call it national output. So we are measuring national income, and this very method is called as income method. Y is written for income in macroeconomics. Now this very income moves to the household sector, and from the household sector it becomes consumption expenditure and then goes to the business sector. So if you measure national income over here as well, then there's no problem, and this very method is called as consumption expenditure. So this becomes our consumption expenditure. It is also one of the methods of measuring national income. And the third method is focus on this very point. So it is goods and services produced by the business sector, and this is the payment made by the household sector for the utilization of these goods and services. So the point here is that if we go for the market value of goods and services, all the goods and services and their monetary value, then that will also give us again the amount of national income. So this is called as a product method, or it is also called as value added method. Later on we will see in one of our lectures what this value added method is. So in principle, what should happen is that the amount given over here and the amount given over here and the amount given over here, that is these three, the amount given by these three methods should be ideally same, because it is the same amount that is flowing through the entire uh, loops of the circular flow. So this is the amount is also the same over here. So these are the three methods of measuring national income. Let's now focus on one more important thing about the circular flow of income. Now this is household sector, this is our business sector, and let's only take now the financial dimensions into consideration, because that will serve our purpose over here. So this is flow of money from household sector to the business sector in the form of consumption expenditure, and this is flow of money from the business sector to the household sector in the form of factor payments. Let's suppose this is $100 or 100 rupees, okay, and the household sector decides that the income will be divided into consumption 80 plus $20 or 20 rupees as saving. So this is consumption and this is saving. Now you can see that in this loop we'll be only having now 80 rupees or $80 rather than $100 that we have over here, because the household sector has decided that it will go for saving of 20 rupees. For example, these 20 rupees are kept by the household sector with itself and not thrown into the circular flow anymore. So if such a case occurs, then obviously the circular flow 80 rupees will be having here, the business sector will be receiving 80 rupees, and it will only give 80 rupees to the household sector in the form of now a factor payments. So what happens is that if we take money from the circular flow, the circular flow, what will happen to it, its volume, its value will decrease. So there will be reduction in circular flow, and these things which we withhold from circular flow, these are called as leakages. These are called as leakages or withdrawals. So leakages and withdrawals reduce circular flow. On the contrary, and this can be done by the household sector and business sector alike, they can also make some saving and reduce the amount that flows in the circular flow into in these loops, in these circuits. Now on the contrary, if case is such, for example, we have 100 rupees here, right, and household sector adds further 20 rupees into it from its inheritance. For example, it had some money pending with it, and it is throwing that money into the circular flow. Therefore this amount is going to be 120. This amount is going to be 120, and thus our circular flow, its amount is going to increase. Now such entities which increase the circular flow amount in the circular flow of national income are called as injections. So this amount was not there in the circular flow, but we have injected it from somewhere, and this can be done by the household sector, this can be done by the business sector. It has, if it has some previous savings, and this is what we called as injections. Now injections, what they do to circular flow of income, they increase the amount of the money that flows through these circuits, through these through circular flow. So that is that is the impact of the injections and leakages that we need to keep in mind. A final point now here. What is the role of the capital market or banking sector? So let's take this, it is household sector, and from here we have business sector. So these are two sectors now. Now money is flowing from business sector to the household sector, and from household sector to the business sector. The flow continues in a circular fashion. Now let us suppose again we have 100 rupees here or $100 here, and the household sector decides that it will put 80 rupees for consumption and 20 rupees as saving. But if we have a banking sector, we have a capital market, what will happen is that the 20 rupees will be deposited here, 20 rupees, and then that 20 rupees or $20 will be taken by the business sector for investment from the capital market. So what happens is that this is 100 rupees. Over here we only have 80 rupees because that is what is the total consumption on part of the household sector is. Now if we had no capital market, then this there would have been reduction in the amount present in circular flow of an economy. But because of the presence of the capital market, these 20 rupees re-enter into the circular flow over here. So again we have 80 plus 20 that are received for investment on part of the business sector from the capital market, and again the total amount becomes 100 rupees. So this is the role that is played by the capital market or the banking sector in the circular flow of an economy. They are effectively able to divert an amount back to the circular flow through its medium, by converting savings into investments and providing this facility for the banking sector. And therefore the circular flow of income is not affected at all in the long run from an overall perspective when a banking sector or capital market is present. I hope that you have understood these concepts quite conveniently. If you have any questions and queries, if you have any comments, then do do not forget to mention them in the comment section of my YouTube channel. Do subscribe to my YouTube channel, Nest Economics. Thank you very much.